Before we journey together to the small town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in the autumn of 1966, I want to take a moment to check in with you. If you're here tonight, you might be seeking comfort, a peaceful distraction, or simply a soothing way to drift into sleep. Whatever brought you here, you're welcome in this space. Sometimes our minds feel restless, carrying the weight of daily concerns or the endless thoughts that keep us awake when we most need rest. That's perfectly natural, and tonight, we're going to let those worries gently fade as we explore one of America's most enduring mysteries, a story of a small community that encountered something beyond their understanding, yet found ways to cope and continue. If your mind feels unsettled tonight, if sleep seems elusive, that's okay. There's no pressure here, no expectation except to be present with yourself in this moment. Let your breathing find its own rhythm, and know that whatever challenges you're facing, you don't have to solve them all right now. Sometimes the best thing we can do is simply rest. For the next couple of hours, you can simply listen and let your mind wander to the rolling hills of West Virginia, where the Ohio River winds through ancient valleys, and where ordinary people once encountered something extraordinary that would change their quiet town forever. The Mothman of Point Pleasant. Gentle transition, contemplative pace. The Ohio River flows wide and brown through the hills of West Virginia, carrying with it the history of countless generations who have made their homes along its banks. In 1966, the small city of Point Pleasant sat quietly where the Ohio and Kanawha rivers converge, a community of approximately 6,000 souls who knew each other's families, attended the same churches, and shared the rhythms of small-town American life that had remained largely unchanged for decades. Roger Dale Scarberry was 21 years old in the autumn of 1966, a young man who embodied the hopes and dreams of his generation in small-town America. Born and raised in Point Pleasant, Roger had graduated from Point Pleasant High School in 1963, where he had been known as a quiet, dependable student who preferred working with his hands to academic pursuits. His teachers remembered him as polite and hard-working, though never particularly ambitious in the way that some young people seemed driven to escape their small towns for bigger cities and greater opportunities. Roger's father, Dale Scarberry, worked as a maintenance supervisor at the American cyanamide chemical plant that employed hundreds of residents from Point Pleasant and the surrounding communities. The plant, located along the Ohio River just north of town, produced chemicals and synthetic materials that were shipped throughout the Midwest and beyond. It was steady, reliable work that had supported the Scarberry family for more than a decade, providing them with a modest but comfortable life in a small frame house on one of Point Pleasant's tree-lined residential streets. Roger's mother, Dorothy, had worked part-time as a cashier at the local Kroger grocery store since Roger and his younger sister had started school. She was known throughout the community as a friendly, helpful woman who remembered customers' names and always asked about their families. The Scarberry family attended the First Methodist Church on Main Street, where Roger had been baptized as an infant and had participated in youth group activities throughout his teenage years. After graduating from high school, Roger had found work with a local construction company, learning the skills of carpentry and general building that would serve him well throughout his life. He enjoyed the physical nature of the work and took pride in contributing to the construction of new homes and businesses that were slowly expanding Point Pleasant's boundaries. The work was seasonal and sometimes unpredictable, but it paid well enough for a young man with modest needs and simple aspirations. Roger had met Linda Sue White during their junior year of high school, when they were both 16 years old. Linda was a year younger than Roger, a petite blonde girl with bright blue eyes and a shy smile, who worked afternoons and weekends at her family's small restaurant on Main Street. The White family had operated Linda's cafe for more than 20 years, serving simple, home-cooked meals to local workers, travelers and families who appreciated the friendly atmosphere and reasonable prices. Linda's father, Harold White, had opened the restaurant in 1944, shortly after returning from military service in the Pacific Theatre of World War II. He had saved his military pay and used his veterans' benefits to purchase a small building in downtown Point Pleasant, converting it into a modest diner that specialized in traditional American comfort food. Linda's mother, Margaret, managed the kitchen and did most of the cooking, while Harold worked the counter and waited tables during the busy lunch and dinner periods. Linda had grown up in the restaurant, helping with simple tasks from the time she was old enough to carry plates and refill coffee cups. By the time she met Roger, she was an experienced waitress who could handle the dinner rush with efficiency and grace, charming customers with her genuine friendliness and attention to their needs. She'd planned to work at the restaurant until she graduated from high school, then perhaps find employment as a secretary or clerk in one of Point Pleasant's businesses. Roger and Linda's courtship had been typical of young couples in small-town America during the early 1960s. They attended school dances together, went to movies at the Point Pleasant Theatre on Saturday evenings, and spent summer afternoons at the public swimming pool or walking along the riverfront. Roger would pick Linda up after work at the restaurant, and they would drive through the countryside in his father's car, talking about their hopes for the future and their plans for life together. Their relationship had deepened during their senior year, when it became clear to everyone in their families and community that they were serious about each other. Roger had asked Linda to marry him during the spring of 1965, presenting her with a modest engagement ring that he had purchased with money saved from his construction work. Linda had accepted immediately, and they had begun planning a simple wedding ceremony to be held at the First Methodist Church the following autumn. Roger and Linda had married on October 9, 1965, in a ceremony attended by approximately 100 friends and family members. Linda had worn her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, while Roger had rented a dark suit from the formal wear shop in nearby Huntington. The reception had been held in the church fellowship hall, with food prepared by the women of the congregation and music provided by a local band that included several of Roger's high school classmates. The young couple had moved into a small apartment above the hardware store on Main Street, a modest two-room space that Linda had decorated with furniture purchased from the Sears catalogue and accessories made by her own hands. Roger continued his construction work while Linda kept her job at her family's restaurant, and they had settled into the comfortable routines of married life in a small community where everyone knew their business and wished them well. Steve Mallett was also 21 in 1966, Roger's best friend since elementary school, and his frequent companion in the adventures and misadventures of growing up in Point Pleasant. Steve was taller than Roger, with dark hair and an easy laugh that made him popular with both men and women in their circle of friends. He had been the more outgoing of the two friends during their school years, organising fishing trips and hunting expeditions and serving as the unofficial social director for their group. Steve's family had deeper roots in Point Pleasant than Roger's, with ancestors who had settled in the Ohio River Valley in the early 1800s. His grandfather had operated a small farm outside of town, raising cattle and growing corn and tobacco on the rolling hills that stretched inland from the river. Steve's father had left farming for industrial work, finding employment at the chemical plant where he had worked alongside Roger's father for more than 15 years. After high school, Steve had also found work at the chemical plant, starting in an entry-level position but quickly advancing to more responsible duties due to his intelligence and willingness to learn. The work was steady and well-paying, with good benefits and the security that came from employment with a large established company. Steve had purchased a used car with his first year's earnings and had begun saving money for the house and family that he hoped to have in the near future. Steve had met Mary Susan Johnson during the summer of 1965, when she had moved to Point Pleasant with her family from a smaller town in southeastern West Virginia. Mary was 19 years old, a tall, slender girl with brown hair and green eyes who had a quiet intelligence and a warm, genuine personality that immediately attracted Steve's attention. Her father had found work as a supervisor at one of the manufacturing plants along the river, and the family had purchased a house in one of Point Pleasant's newer residential developments. Mary had found employment as a clerk at Woolworth's Five and Dime store on Main Street, where she worked behind the cosmetics counter and helped customers select merchandise from the store's wide variety of household goods, clothing, and personal items. She was known for her patience with difficult customers and her ability to help shoppers find exactly what they were looking for, even when they weren't quite sure themselves what they needed. Steve and Mary's relationship had developed quickly during the autumn of 1965, with Steve visiting the Woolworth store frequently on pretext of needing various items, but really hoping to talk with Mary during her breaks and lunch periods. By Christmas of that year, they were dating regularly, and Steve had introduced Mary to his family and his circle of friends, including Roger and Linda Scarberry. The two couples had become close friends, often spending their evenings and weekends together at movies, restaurants, or simply driving through the countryside around Point Pleasant. They shared the dreams and aspirations common to young people in small-town America, hopes for steady employment, nice homes, and families of their own. None of them had travelled far from their hometown, and their horizons were bounded by the familiar landmarks of the Ohio River Valley. Steve and Mary had married in June of 1966, in a ceremony similar to Roger and Linda's wedding, but held at the Baptist church that Mary's family attended. The reception had been somewhat larger, reflecting Mary's family's stronger financial position and their desire to welcome their new son-in-law into their community. Steve and Mary had rented a small house on the outskirts of Point Pleasant, furnished with gifts from their families and items purchased with their combined savings. By November of 1966, both couples had settled into the comfortable patterns of married life in Point Pleasant. They worked during the week, attended church on Sundays, and spent their leisure time with friends and family. Their entertainment was simple but satisfying: evening drives through the countryside, weekend visits with relatives, occasional trips to Huntington for shopping, or movies that weren't showing at the local theatre. The area around Point Pleasant provided numerous opportunities for young couples seeking privacy and quiet places to talk and spend time together. The countryside was dotted with rural roads that wound through forests and farmland, past abandoned buildings and forgotten settlements that had once thrived during earlier periods of the region's history. Many of these roads had been built to serve industrial or military purposes and had been largely abandoned as economic conditions changed and facilities closed. One of the most popular destinations for young people seeking privacy was an area known locally as the TNT, a sprawling complex of abandoned buildings and roads that had been constructed during World War II for the production and storage of munitions. The area had been officially designated as the West Virginia Ordnance Works, but everyone in Point Pleasant simply called it the TNT area because of the explosive materials that had once been manufactured and stored there. The TNT area covered approximately 8,000 acres of hills and valleys north of Point Pleasant, connected to the town by a network of rural roads that had originally been built to transport workers and materials to and from the facility. During the war, the area had employed thousands of people from throughout the Ohio River Valley, working around the clock to produce the ammunition and explosives needed for the Allied war effort. By 1966, the TNT area had been abandoned for more than 20 years. The federal government had sold much of the land to private owners and the state of West Virginia, but many of the original structures remained standing. Massive concrete bunkers, designed to contain explosions if accidents occurred, dotted the landscape like ancient monuments. Roads that had once carried heavy truck traffic were gradually being reclaimed by the forest, with weeds and small trees growing through cracks in the asphalt. The abandoned bunkers were particularly impressive structures, built to withstand enormous explosions and designed to last for generations. They were constructed of reinforced concrete several feet thick, with earth mounded over and around them for additional protection. Many were partially buried in hillsides, with only their massive concrete doors visible from the roads that wound between them. Local residents called them igloos because of their rounded dome-like appearance. Young people from Point Pleasant had been using the roads through the TNT area as lovers' lanes since the early 1950s, drawn by the privacy and isolation that the abandoned facility provided. The roads were well maintained enough for ordinary cars, and the numerous side paths and dead ends offered plenty of secluded spots where couples could park and talk without being disturbed by traffic or curious observers. The area had an atmosphere that was both peaceful and slightly mysterious. During daylight hours, it was simply a wooded area with some unusual concrete structures scattered among the trees. But after dark, the abandoned bunkers and empty buildings took on a more ominous appearance, their dark shapes looming like sleeping giants in the forest. The isolation that made the area attractive to young couples also meant that strange sounds and shadows could take on an exaggerated significance in the imagination. November 15th, 1966 was a Tuesday evening in Point Pleasant, with temperatures in the low 50s and light winds stirring the bare branches of the trees that lined the town's residential streets. It had been an ordinary autumn day, with most residents going about their usual routines of work, school and family responsibilities. The evening news had carried the typical stories of the era, reports from Vietnam, political developments in Washington, and local news from the tri-state area. Roger Scarborough had finished his workday at the construction site where his crew was building a new addition to one of the schools in a neighbouring community. The work had gone well, and they were ahead of schedule on the project, which meant steady employment through the winter months when construction work sometimes became scarce. Roger had driven home to the apartment he shared with Linda, looking forward to a quiet evening with his wife and perhaps a drive through the countryside if the weather remained pleasant. Linda had worked the afternoon shift at her family's restaurant, serving coffee and pie to the regular customers who stopped by after their own workdays ended. The restaurant had been busy but not overwhelming, and Linda had enjoyed the friendly conversations with familiar faces that made her job more pleasure than work. She had prepared a simple dinner for herself and Roger, and they had eaten while discussing their plans for the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday and their hopes for purchasing a small house of their own in the near future. Steve Mallette had completed his shift at the chemical plant, where he had been working with a crew that was performing routine maintenance on some of the facility's production equipment. The work had been straightforward but physically demanding, requiring careful attention to safety procedures and precise execution of complex tasks. Steve had arrived home tired but satisfied with the day's accomplishments, ready to relax and spend time with Mary. Mary had closed the cosmetics counter at Woolworths at 6 o'clock, after helping several customers select gifts for upcoming birthdays and anniversaries. She enjoyed the personal interaction that her job provided and took pride in her ability to help people find exactly what they were looking for. She had stopped at the grocery store on her way home to purchase ingredients for the dinner she planned to prepare for herself and Steve. The two couples had made tentative plans to spend the evening together, perhaps going to a movie or simply driving around the countryside as they often did when they wanted to talk and enjoy each other's company. The decision to drive to the TNT area had been spontaneous, suggested by Steve as they discussed their options for entertainment on a quiet Tuesday evening in November. Roger had picked up Steve and Mary in his red 1957 Chevrolet, a car that he had purchased used earlier that year, and that had become his pride and joy. The Chevrolet was in excellent condition, with a powerful V8 engine that Roger maintained meticulously, and a bright red paint job that gleamed under the streetlights as they drove through Point Pleasant's quiet residential neighbourhoods. Linda sat in the front passenger seat beside her husband, while Steve and Mary occupied the back seat, all four young people comfortable in the easy familiarity of friendship and shared experiences. They talked casually as Roger drove through the town and out onto the rural road that led toward the TNT area, discussing work, mutual friends, and their plans for the approaching holiday season. The drive to the TNT area took approximately 15 minutes from the centre of Point Pleasant, following a 2-lane rural road that wound through farmland and patches of forest before reaching the entrance to the abandoned facility. The road was quiet on this Tuesday evening, with only occasional traffic from residents of the rural communities that dotted the countryside north of town. As they entered the TNT area, the landscape changed from the open farmland that surrounded Point Pleasant to the more densely forested terrain where the abandoned military facility had been located. The road surface became rougher, though still passable for ordinary vehicles, and the concrete bunkers began to appear among the trees like mysterious monuments to a forgotten era. Roger drove slowly along the main road through the TNT area, taking the familiar route that he and his friends had travelled many times before. The headlights of the Chevrolet illuminated the road ahead and cast moving shadows among the trees and abandoned structures. The four young people continued their casual conversation, though the isolated atmosphere of the abandoned facility had a subtle effect on their mood, making them speak more quietly than they had during the drive from town. The concrete igloos loomed on both sides of the road, their rounded forms barely visible in the darkness beyond the reach of the car's headlights. During daylight hours, the bunkers appeared relatively benign, simply unusual structures left over from an earlier time. But in the darkness, they took on a more ominous appearance, their dark openings and massive concrete walls suggesting hidden depths and unknown purposes. Roger had driven perhaps 2 miles into the TNT area when he spotted what appeared to be 2 red lights in the distance ahead. His first assumption was that the lights belonged to another vehicle, perhaps another young couple who had come to the area for the same reasons that had brought his group there. The TNT area was large enough to accommodate multiple visitors without crowding, and it was not unusual to encounter other cars during evening drives through the facility. However, as Roger slowed the Chevrolet and peered more carefully at the red lights, he began to realize that something was not quite right about what he was seeing. The lights appeared to be stationary rather than moving, and they seemed to be positioned at an unusual height above the ground. They also had an intensity and quality that was different from the taillights of any car that Roger had ever seen. "Do you see those lights up ahead?" Roger asked his passengers, pointing toward the red glow that was visible through the windshield. Linda leaned forward to get a better view, while Steve and Mary pressed against the windows of the back seat to see what had caught Roger's attention. "Those aren't car lights," Linda said after studying the red glow for several moments. "They're too bright, and they're not moving like they should be if someone was driving around up there." Her voice carried a note of uncertainty, as if she was not quite sure what to make of what she was seeing. Steve agreed with Linda's assessment, noting that the lights appeared to be positioned higher above the ground than would be normal for vehicle lighting. "Maybe someone's got a spotlight or something," he suggested, though he did not sound entirely convinced by his own explanation. Roger brought the Chevrolet to a complete stop approximately 50 yards from the source of the red lights, and the 4 young people sat in the car staring ahead into the darkness. The red glow continued to shine with steady intensity, showing no signs of movement or change. There was no sound of engines or human voices, only the quiet idle of their own car and the gentle whisper of wind through the bare branches of the trees. As they watched, a massive shape began to emerge from behind one of the larger concrete igloos. At first, it appeared to be simply a shadow or a trick of the light, but as it moved further into the open area near the road, its true nature became horrifyingly clear. The red lights were not mechanical devices at all, but were actually the eyes of an enormous creature unlike anything any of them had ever seen or imagined. The being that stood before them was humanoid in its basic shape, but was clearly not human. It stood between 6 and 7 feet tall, with a powerful muscular build that suggested immense physical strength. Its body appeared to be covered with grey or brown fur or feathers, though the lighting conditions made it difficult to determine the exact texture or colour of its covering. Most terrifying of all were the creature's wings, enormous appendages that extended from its shoulders and back, spanning what appeared to be 10 to 15 feet from tip to tip when fully spread. The wings had a leathery or feathered appearance, though again the darkness made precise observation difficult. When partially folded against the creature's body, the wings gave it an even more imposing appearance, adding to its already considerable height and bulk. The creature's head appeared somewhat small in proportion to its massive body, but the red eyes that glowed from that head were clearly the source of the lights that had first attracted their attention. The eyes were enormous, perhaps the size of dinner plates, and they glowed with an internal fire that was both hypnotic and deeply unsettling. The red light that emanated from the eyes was bright enough to illuminate the immediate area around the creature, casting an eerie glow on the concrete bunker and the surrounding vegetation. For what seemed like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds, the 4 young people and the mysterious creature simply stared at each other across the darkened landscape of the TNT area. The being showed no signs of fear or surprise at the presence of humans, standing motionless with its great wings partially spread and its burning red eyes fixed on the Chevrolet and its occupants. Linda was the first to break the silence, letting out a soft gasp that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet of the forest. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear and disbelief. "What is that thing?" Roger's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he tried to process what he was seeing. His mind searched for rational explanations. Perhaps it was someone in a costume, or an optical illusion created by the interplay of shadows and artificial lighting. But even as he considered these possibilities, he knew that what stood before them was something genuinely extraordinary and potentially dangerous. Steve and Mary sat frozen in the back seat, unable to speak or move as they stared at the impossible creature that had materialized from the darkness. Steve would later describe the experience as feeling like a dream or nightmare, where normal rules of reality seemed to be suspended and anything might happen next. The creature's behavior during these initial moments suggested intelligence and awareness. It appeared to be studying the humans with the same intensity that they were studying it, tilting its head slightly as if trying to understand the nature of the strange metal conveyance that had brought these beings into its territory. Its red eyes moved from the car to its occupants, seeming to focus on each person individually before moving on to the next. The spell was broken when Roger's survival instincts finally overcame his fascination with the impossible sight before him. "We're getting out of here," he announced, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. He threw the Chevrolet into reverse and began backing away from the creature as quickly as the narrow road and darkness would allow. The moment the car began to move, the creature's demeanor changed dramatically. It spread its enormous wings to their full extent, creating a silhouette that seemed to blot out the stars, and launched itself into the air with a fluid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. The being's takeoff was completely silent, with no sound of rushing air or flapping wings that might be expected from something of such enormous size. What followed was a chase that would haunt the four young people for the rest of their lives. The creature pursued the fleeing Chevrolet with a speed and agility that seemed to defy the laws of physics. It flew alongside and above the car as Roger accelerated along the winding roads of the TNT area, its massive wings moving slowly and deliberately while it maintained perfect pace with the speeding vehicle. Roger pushed the Chevrolet's accelerator to the floor, and the powerful V8 engine responded with a roar that echoed through the forest. The speedometer climbed past 50, then 60, then 70 miles per hour as he navigated the curves and hills of the rural road. Behind them, the creature kept perfect pace, never falling behind despite the car's increasing speed. "It's keeping up with us," Linda cried, turning in her seat to look back at the pursuing being. "How can it fly that fast?" Her voice was high with panic, and she clutched Roger's arm so tightly that her fingernails left marks through his jacket. Steve pressed his face against the rear window, watching in amazement and terror as the creature glided effortlessly through the air behind them. "It's not even flapping its wings hard," he reported, his voice filled with disbelief. "It's just floating along like it's the easiest thing in the world." The most unnerving aspect of the chase was the complete silence with which the creature moved through the air. Despite its enormous size and the speed at which it was travelling, it made no sound whatsoever. There was no rush of wind through feathers, no beating of wings, no cries or calls that might be expected from such a massive flying being. The only sounds were the roar of the Chevrolet's engine, the squeal of tyres on the rough pavement, and the frightened breathing of the car's four occupants. The creature's red eyes remained fixed on the car throughout the pursuit, glowing like burning coals in the darkness. The intensity of that gaze was perhaps the most frightening aspect of the entire experience, suggesting an intelligence and purpose that went far beyond simple animal curiosity. The being was not merely chasing them, it was studying them, learning about them, perhaps evaluating them for reasons that none of the four young people wanted to contemplate. Roger later estimated that the chase continued for approximately 5 miles, though in their state of terror it seemed both longer and shorter than that. The creature followed them through the winding roads of the TNT area and out onto the more open highways that led back toward Point Pleasant. It showed no signs of fatigue or difficulty in maintaining its incredible speed. gliding through the air with the same effortless grace whether flying over forests, fields, or open road. As they approached the outskirts of Point Pleasant, with the reassuring lights of civilization beginning to appear in the distance, the creature's behavior suddenly changed. Instead of continuing the pursuit, it veered away from the road and headed toward the Ohio River, disappearing into the darkness over the water with the same silent grace that had characterized its entire performance. Roger continued driving at high speed until they reached the center of Point Pleasant, finally slowing down when they were surrounded by streetlights and the familiar landmarks of their hometown. He pulled into the parking lot of a local diner, and the four young people sat in the car for several minutes, trying to catch their breath and process what they had just experienced. "Did that really happen?" Mary asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did we really see what I think we saw?" She was pale and shaking, clutching Steve's hand so tightly that her knuckles were white. "We all saw it," Steve replied, though his own voice carried a note of disbelief. "Whatever that thing was, we all saw it together. We couldn't all be imagining the same thing." He tried to sound more confident than he felt, but the experience had shaken him to his core. Linda was crying quietly, her face buried in her hands as she tried to come to terms with what had just occurred. "What if it comes back?" she asked. "What if it follows us home? What if it's out there right now, watching us?" Roger tried to comfort his wife while dealing with his own fear and confusion. "It's gone," he said, though he was far from certain of that fact. "It flew away toward the river. I don't think it's going to bother us anymore." But even as he spoke the words, he found himself scanning the dark sky above the diner, looking for any sign of glowing red eyes or massive wings. After several minutes of discussion, the four young people decided that they needed to report what they had seen to the authorities. Despite their fear of ridicule and disbelief, they felt a responsibility to warn others about the presence of something dangerous and unknown in the TNT area. Roger drove to the Mason County Sheriff's Department, where they requested to speak with an officer about an unusual incident. Deputy Millard Halstead was working the evening shift when the four young people arrived at the Sheriff's Department. Deputy Halstead was a man in his 40s who had served in law enforcement for nearly 20 years, and he had developed a reputation for fairness, thoroughness, and common sense. He had known all four of the young people since they were children, and he could see immediately that they were genuinely distressed by whatever they had experienced. Roger served as the primary spokesman for the group, recounting their experience in the TNT area while Linda, Steve, and Mary provided additional details and confirmation. Deputy Halstead listened carefully to their account, asking specific questions about times, locations, and the creature's appearance and behavior. He could see that all four witnesses were consistent in their descriptions, and that their fear was genuine and immediate. Despite the fantastic nature of their story, Deputy Halstead was impressed by several factors that suggested the young people were telling the truth about their experience. First, all four were known to him as honest, reliable individuals who had never been involved in pranks or troublemaking. Second, their obvious distress was not the kind of emotion that could be easily faked. Third, their accounts were remarkably consistent even when he questioned them separately about specific details. Deputy Halstead made the decision to investigate the report personally, both to look for evidence of whatever the young people had encountered, and to provide them with the reassurance that their concerns were being taken seriously. He arranged to meet them at the TNT area later that evening, bringing additional equipment and backup in case they encountered something genuinely dangerous. The return trip to the TNT area took place approximately 2 hours after the initial encounter, with Deputy Halstead following the four young people's car in his patrol vehicle. They drove slowly along the same route that Roger had taken earlier, searching the shadows between the abandoned bunkers for any sign of the creature or evidence of its presence. Although they found no trace of the being itself, Deputy Halstead did notice several unusual phenomena during their investigation. His police radio began experiencing strange interference as they drove through certain areas of the TNT facility. High-pitched whining sounds and bursts of static that he had never encountered before in his years of law enforcement. The interference was strongest near the bunker, where the creature had first been sighted and faded as they moved away from that location. Deputy Halstead also observed that the wildlife in the area seemed unusually quiet and agitated. Normally, the forest around the TNT area was filled with the sounds of night creatures, owls, raccoons, and other nocturnal animals going about their business. But on this evening, the forest was eerily silent, as if the local wildlife was hiding or had fled the area entirely. The search continued for more than an hour, with Deputy Halstead and the 4 young people examining the ground around the bunker where the creature had been seen. They found no footprints, disturbed vegetation, or other physical evidence that might confirm the presence of a large unknown animal. However, the absence of evidence did not necessarily disprove their account, since a flying creature would not be expected to leave the same traces as a ground-dwelling animal. Deputy Halstead was sufficiently impressed by the witnesses' sincerity and the unusual phenomena he had observed to file an official report of the incident. He also made the decision to contact the local news media, believing that other residents of the area should be aware of what had been reported in case they encountered something similar during their own travels through the countryside. The decision to involve the news media would prove to be momentous, as it set in motion a chain of events that would transform Point Pleasant from an obscure small town into the centre of one of America's most famous paranormal mysteries. Within days, the story of the 4 young people's encounter with the unknown creature would spread far beyond the Ohio River Valley, attracting attention from investigators, reporters, and curiosity seekers from around the country. Mary Heyer was the Point Pleasant correspondent for the Athens Messenger, a regional newspaper that covered news throughout southeastern Ohio and western West Virginia. She had been working as a journalist for more than 15 years and had built a reputation for thorough, accurate reporting on everything from local government meetings to high school sports. When Deputy Halstead contacted her about the unusual incident in the TNT area, she agreed to interview the witnesses and write an article about their experience. Mary Heyer was a woman who approached every story with both professional skepticism and genuine curiosity. She had covered everything from local politics to tragic accidents, and she had learned to distinguish between reliable witnesses and those whose accounts might be influenced by alcohol, attention-seeking, or simple confusion. When she met with Roger, Linda, Steve, and Mary to hear their story firsthand, she was immediately struck by their obvious reluctance to discuss their experience. Unlike many people who claim to have witnessed unusual phenomena, these 4 young people seemed genuinely embarrassed by the attention their report was generating. They had not contacted the media themselves and appeared to regret having reported their experience to the authorities. This reluctance actually enhanced their credibility in Mary Heyer's experienced judgment, as attention seekers typically sought as much publicity as possible for their claims. When Mary Heyer interviewed the witnesses separately, she was impressed by the consistency of their accounts. They described the same sequence of events, the same appearance for the creature, and the same feelings of terror and bewilderment. Their descriptions included specific details that would have been difficult to coordinate if they were fabricating their story, and their emotional responses seemed genuine and immediate. Mary Heyer's article about the TNT area encounter appeared in the Athens Messenger on November 18, 1966, just 3 days after the incident occurred. The headline read, "Couple see man-sized bird, creature, something," reflecting both the witnesses' uncertainty about what they had encountered and Mary Heyer's careful approach to reporting claims that challenged conventional understanding. The article provided a straightforward account of what the 4 young people claimed to have experienced, including their descriptions of the creature's appearance and behaviour, the details of the terrifying chase, and Deputy Halstead's investigation of their report. Mary Heyer presented the information without editorial comment, allowing readers to draw their own conclusions about the credibility and significance of the witnesses' claims. The response to Mary Heyer's article was immediate and far-reaching. The Associated Press picked up the story and distributed it to newspapers throughout the United States, introducing millions of Americans to the strange events that had occurred in the hills of West Virginia. Radio stations began discussing the story on their talk shows, and television news programs picked up the report for their evening broadcasts. It was during this initial wave of media coverage that the creature acquired its famous name. A copy editor at one of the newspapers that ran the story, possibly influenced by the recent popularity of the Batman television series, coined the term Mothman to describe the winged being. The name captured the public imagination and quickly became the standard designation for the mysterious creature. The widespread media attention brought both welcome and unwelcome consequences for Point Pleasant and its residents. On the positive side, the town found itself the centre of national attention, with reporters and visitors arriving daily to learn more about the Mothman and to interview the witnesses. Local businesses benefited from the increased tourism, and Point Pleasant gained a unique identity that distinguished it from thousands of other small American towns. However, the attention also created problems for the 4 original witnesses, who found themselves overwhelmed by requests for interviews, photographs, and personal appearances. Roger, Linda, Steve, and Mary had not sought fame or publicity, and they became increasingly uncomfortable with the circus-like atmosphere that surrounded their story. They began declining most interview requests and retreated from public discussion of their experience. The media coverage also encouraged other residents of the Point Pleasant area to come forward with their own accounts of unusual encounters and unexplained phenomena. Within days of the first newspaper article, Mary Heyer was receiving telephone calls from people throughout Mason County who claimed to have seen strange lights, unusual creatures, or other mysterious occurrences in recent weeks and months. One of the most compelling early reports came from Newell Partridge, a building contractor who lived in Salem, West Virginia, approximately 90 miles southeast of Point Pleasant. Partridge's experience had occurred on November 14th, the evening before the Scarberry Mallet encounter, though he had not connected it to the later reports until he heard about the Mothman on the radio. Newell Partridge was a practical man in his 50s who had spent his entire adult life in the construction business. He was known throughout his community as reliable, honest, and not given to flights of fancy or exaggeration. On the evening in question, he had been watching television in his rural home when the picture suddenly dissolved into a pattern of strange interference unlike anything he had seen before. Partridge went outside to check his television antenna, thinking that wind or weather might have caused it to shift position. As he stood in his yard looking up at the antenna mounted on his roof, he became aware of 2 large, bright red eyes staring at him from the darkness beyond his property line. The eyes appeared to be positioned approximately 6 feet above the ground and seemed to be watching him with obvious intelligence and intent. When Partridge shined a flashlight in the direction of the red eyes, they immediately disappeared, but he heard a sound that he later described as resembling large wings moving through the air. The sound came from the direction where the eyes had been visible, suggesting that whatever creature possessed those eyes was capable of flight and had departed when illuminated by his flashlight. Even more disturbing to Partridge was what happened to his dog, Bandit, a large German shepherd who normally stayed close to the house and was extremely protective of his owner and property. When the red eyes appeared, Bandit had run toward them despite Partridge's calls for him to return. The dog had disappeared into the darkness and had never been seen again, despite extensive searching and calling throughout the following days. The loss of his faithful companion was deeply troubling to Partridge, who had owned Bandit for more than 5 years and had never known the dog to run away or ignore his commands. Bandit was well-trained, intelligent, and devoted to his owner, making his disappearance all the more mysterious and concerning. Partridge was convinced that something had happened to his dog in the darkness beyond his yard, though he could only speculate about what that might have been. The morning after his encounter with the red eyes, Partridge had driven toward Point Pleasant on business, and had noticed an unusual number of dead birds along the roadside. This was not something he had observed during his many years of travelling the rural roads of West Virginia, and the sight struck him as both strange and somehow ominous. When he later heard about the Mothman sighting, he wondered if there might be a connection between his own experience and the creature that had been seen in the TNT area. Partridge's account was significant for several reasons. First, it established that unusual phenomena had been occurring in the region before the famous November 15th encounter, suggesting that the Mothman's presence might be part of a larger pattern of activity rather than an isolated incident. Second, it provided additional evidence that the creature was capable of affecting both electronic equipment and animal behaviour, phenomena that would become recurring themes in subsequent reports. As word of the Mothman spread throughout the community and beyond, additional witnesses began coming forward with their own stories of strange encounters. Construction workers at the Point Pleasant Industrial Complex reported seeing a large winged figure flying over the chemical plants along the Ohio River. Drivers on Route 9, the main highway connecting Point Pleasant to Huntington, claimed to have spotted a massive bird-like creature perched on billboards, water towers, and telephone poles. These additional sightings helped to establish a pattern of behaviour and preferred locations for the mysterious creature. The Mothman seemed to favour industrial areas, transportation corridors, and locations near the Ohio River. It was most commonly seen during evening and nighttime hours, though there were occasional daytime sightings by witnesses who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Perhaps most significantly, many residents began reporting unusual behaviour among their pets and livestock in the days and weeks following the initial Mothman sighting. Dogs that normally barked at strangers became quiet and withdrawn, often hiding under porches or in other secluded areas. Cats disappeared from their homes and failed to return, despite being well fed and cared for by their owners. Farm animals showed signs of nervousness and agitation, refusing to graze in pastures where they had previously been comfortable. The animal reactions were particularly troubling to rural residents who depended on their livestock, and who understood that animals often sensed dangers that humans could not detect. Farmers reported that their cattle would gather in tight groups at the far end of pastures, as if trying to distance themselves from some perceived threat. Horses became skittish and difficult to handle, requiring extra time and patience to perform routine tasks like harnessing and saddling. Domestic animals showed similar stress responses. Dogs that had previously been confident and outgoing became nervous and clingy, following their owners constantly and showing reluctance to go outside after dark. Cats that had been friendly and social withdrew from human contact, hiding in basements, attics, and other secluded areas where they felt safe from unknown dangers. The reports of animal disturbance were not limited to Point Pleasant but extended throughout Mason County and into adjacent areas of Ohio and Kentucky. This geographical distribution suggested that whatever was causing the animals' distress was not confined to the immediate vicinity of the TNT area, but was present throughout a much larger region of the Ohio River Valley. In addition to the animal reactions, residents throughout the area began experiencing problems with electronic equipment and communications devices. Television sets suffered from unusual interference patterns that could not be explained by weather conditions or technical problems with broadcasting equipment. The interference often consisted of strange geometric patterns or swirling designs that appeared on screens without warning and disappeared just as suddenly. Telephone service also became unreliable throughout the Point Pleasant area during the weeks following the initial Mothman sighting. Residents reported hearing strange voices or sounds on their phone lines, including mechanical buzzing, high-pitched whines, and what sounded like electronic music or coded transmissions. Some people received telephone calls where the caller seemed to know personal information about their lives, but refused to identify themselves or explain how they had obtained such knowledge. Radio reception became similarly problematic, with car radios and home stereo systems picking up signals that did not correspond to any known broadcasting stations. These mysterious transmissions often occurred late at night and consisted of incomprehensible sounds, foreign languages, or what appeared to be coded messages. The signals were strongest in areas near the TNT facility and along the Ohio River, suggesting some connection to the locations where Mothman sightings were most frequent. Automotive problems also became common throughout the region during this period. Cars that had been running perfectly would suddenly stall while travelling near the TNT area or other locations associated with Mothman sightings. The engines would simply stop running, often while driving at highway speeds, creating dangerous situations for the occupants. After sitting for several minutes, the vehicles would usually restart normally, with no apparent mechanical problems or explanations for the temporary failure. These automotive malfunctions were particularly puzzling to local mechanics, who could find no mechanical reasons for the sudden stalling episodes. The car's electrical systems, fuel systems, and engines all appeared to be functioning normally when examined after the incidents. The randomness and temporary nature of the problems made them impossible to diagnose or prevent, creating anxiety among residents who depended on their vehicles for transportation to work and other essential activities. Dr. Robert Smith, a professor of wildlife biology at West Virginia University, was contacted by several news outlets to provide expert commentary on the Mothman reports. Dr. Smith had spent his career studying the birds and animals of West Virginia and was considered one of the state's leading authorities on local wildlife. He approached the Mothman phenomenon with the scientific skepticism that his training demanded, while acknowledging that the consistency of witness accounts deserved serious consideration. Dr. Smith's initial assessment was that the witnesses had most likely encountered a large bird under conditions that made accurate observation difficult. He noted that several species of large birds, including sandhill cranes and great blue herons, were known to inhabit the Ohio River Valley and could appear quite imposing when seen unexpectedly in poor lighting conditions. The red eyes reported by witnesses might have been the reflection of light from the bird's natural eyeshine, a phenomenon common in many nocturnal animals. However, as Dr. Smith studied the witness accounts more carefully, he found that his conventional explanations did not adequately address several aspects of the reported encounters. The creature's described size, behavior, and capabilities seemed to exceed those of any known bird species in North America. No native bird could achieve the flight speeds that witnesses claimed the Mothman had demonstrated during its pursuit of the Scarberry vehicle, nor could any known species fly with the silent efficiency that characterized all the reported sightings. The creature's apparent intelligence and awareness also distinguished it from typical wildlife behavior. The Mothman seemed to deliberately observe and study human activities, showing curiosity about people and their technology, rather than the fear or avoidance that would be expected from a wild animal encountering humans. This behavioral pattern suggested either an unknown species with unusual characteristics, or something other than a natural animal altogether. Dr. Smith also found it difficult to explain the electromagnetic phenomena and animal disturbances that accompanied the Mothman sightings. While some animals did show stress responses to unusual environmental conditions, the widespread and consistent nature of the reactions throughout the Point Pleasant area suggested influences that went beyond normal wildlife behavior. The electronic interference and communications problems were particularly puzzling, as they had no obvious connection to the presence of large birds or other conventional wildlife. As November gave way to December of 1966, the frequency of Mothman sightings in the Point Pleasant area actually increased rather than declined. The creature was being reported almost daily by residents throughout Mason County, with encounters occurring at various times of day and in numerous different locations. The consistency of the descriptions remained remarkable, with virtually all witnesses describing the same basic physical characteristics and behavioral patterns. One of the most detailed and credible sightings during this period occurred on December 11th, when Marcella Bennett, the sister-in-law of Linda Scarberry, had her own terrifying encounter with the Mothman. Bennett was a young mother visiting friends who lived near the TNT area when she decided to walk to her car to retrieve a diaper bag she had forgotten. The evening was clear and cold, with temperatures in the 30s and a light breeze stirring the bare branches of the trees. As Bennett approached her car in the gathering dusk, she saw a large grey figure rise up from behind the vehicle, where it had apparently been crouching or hiding. The creature was even more imposing than previous witnesses had described, standing well over 6 feet tall with enormous wings that seemed to fill her entire field of vision when spread to their full extent. Its red eyes fixed on her with the same hypnotic intensity that had terrorized the original witnesses, and Bennett found herself unable to move or speak. What made Bennett's encounter particularly significant was her description of the creature's behaviour, which differed from previous reports in subtle but important ways. Rather than appearing aggressive or threatening, the Mothman seemed almost cautious or protective in its demeanour. It made no move to approach Bennett, and when it realised it had been observed, it spread its wings and departed with the same silent grace that characterised all the reported sightings. Bennett's encounter lasted only a few seconds, but the experience left her deeply shaken and convinced that she had witnessed something genuinely supernatural. Unlike some witnesses who attempted to find rational explanations for their experiences, Bennett was certain that what she had seen was not a natural animal or a case of mistaken identity. The creature's size, appearance, and behaviour were unlike anything in her experience or imagination. The incident also had a profound effect on Bennett's infant daughter, who had been sleeping in the car during the encounter. The baby woke screaming at the moment the Mothman appeared and continued crying inconsolably for several hours afterward. This reaction was particularly troubling to Bennett, who believed that young children were often more sensitive to supernatural presences than adults. Throughout the winter of 1966 and 1967, Mothman sightings continued with remarkable regularity throughout the Point Pleasant area and beyond. The creature was reported in neighbouring counties in West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky, suggesting either that it was highly mobile or that multiple individuals of the same unknown species were present in the Ohio River Valley. The expanding geographical range of sightings led some investigators to theorize that the Mothman might be migratory, following the river valleys as it moved between unknown territories or nesting areas. This theory gained support from reports of similar creatures in other locations throughout the eastern United States during the same time period, including sightings along the Potomac River in Maryland and Virginia and near major rivers in Pennsylvania and Ohio. However, not all of the strange phenomena in Point Pleasant during this period were directly related to Mothman sightings. Residents began reporting other types of unusual experiences that seemed to be connected to the creature's presence in the area, but involved different types of encounters and manifestations. UFO sightings became increasingly common, with witnesses describing strange lights and aircraft that moved through the sky in patterns and at speeds that defied conventional explanation. These unidentified flying objects were typically described as bright lights that could hover motionless for extended periods, then suddenly accelerate to tremendous speeds before disappearing into the distance. Unlike the Mothman, which was clearly a physical entity with recognizable biological characteristics, the UFOs seemed to be technological in nature, possibly representing some form of advanced aircraft or spacecraft. Even more mysterious were the reports of men in black, strange individuals who appeared in Point Pleasant during the height of the Mothman activity, and approached witnesses with questions about their experiences. These men were typically described as being dressed in dark suits and having an odd mechanical manner of speaking that made residents uncomfortable during their encounters. The men in black claimed to be government agents investigating the unusual reports, but they carried no official identification and asked questions that seemed designed more to intimidate witnesses than to gather useful information. They often knew personal details about the people they approached, including information that was not public knowledge, suggesting access to private records or surveillance capabilities. Mary Heyer, the journalist who had first reported the Mothman story, became a particular target of interest for these mysterious visitors. They appeared at her home and office on several occasions, asking detailed questions about her investigation and attempting to obtain copies of her notes and files. When she refused to cooperate with their requests, they became increasingly insistent and threatening in their approach. The men in black phenomenon added another layer of mystery and concern to the already complex situation in Point Pleasant. Their presence suggested that someone or some organization was taking the Mothman reports very seriously and was conducting their own investigation into the events. However, their secretive methods and intimidating behavior raised questions about their true identity and motivations. As winter gradually gave way to spring in 1967, the people of Point Pleasant had become accustomed to living with the ongoing mystery of the Mothman and its associated phenomena. The creature continued to be sighted regularly throughout the area, and residents had developed their own strategies for dealing with the uncertainty and fear that its presence created. Some people avoided the areas where sightings were most common, particularly the TNT facility and the roads along the Ohio River. Others carried flashlights, cameras, or other equipment in hopes of documenting an encounter if one occurred. A few brave individuals actually sought out the creature, driving through the TNT area at night in hopes of witnessing the phenomenon for themselves. The Mothman had become such an integral part of Point Pleasant's identity that it was difficult to imagine the community without its mysterious resident. Local businesses began capitalizing on the attention the creature had brought to their town, selling souvenirs and offering services to the steady stream of visitors who came seeking information about the sightings. However, the constant attention and speculation was taking its toll on many residents, particularly those who had witnessed the creature firsthand. The original 4 witnesses, Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette, had largely withdrawn from public discussion of their experience, declining most interview requests and avoiding the publicity that continued to surround their story. As spring turned to summer in 1967, one of the most significant developments in the Mothman investigation occurred with the arrival of John Keel, a journalist and author who specialized in unexplained phenomena. Keel had heard about the Point Pleasant events through the extensive media coverage and had decided to conduct his own investigation into the sightings and related occurrences. John Keel was unlike the casual curiosity seekers and amateur investigators who had visited Point Pleasant during the previous months. He was a serious researcher with years of experience studying unexplained phenomena, and he brought a systematic scientific approach to his investigation of the Mothman reports. Keel spent more than a year in Point Pleasant, interviewing witnesses, investigating sightings, and attempting to understand the nature of the events that were occurring in the area. Keel's investigation was more thorough and comprehensive than any previous study of the Mothman phenomenon. He interviewed dozens of witnesses, mapped the locations of sightings, analyzed the patterns of activity, and looked for connections between the creature's appearances and other unusual events in the region. His work revealed patterns and relationships that had not been recognized by earlier investigators. One of Keel's most significant discoveries was that the Point Pleasant area had a long history of unusual phenomena that predated the Mothman sightings by many years. Through research in historical records and interviews with longtime residents, he learned that Native American tribes had reported encounters with mysterious creatures and unexplained lights in the region for centuries before European settlement. Early European settlers had also documented strange encounters in their journals and letters, describing meetings with unknown beings and sightings of aerial phenomena that bore striking similarities to the modern Mothman reports. These historical accounts suggested that whatever was happening in Point Pleasant in the 1960s was part of a much longer pattern of unusual activity in the Ohio River Valley. Keel also discovered that workers at the TNT facility during World War II had reported their own encounters with unexplained phenomena. Despite the security restrictions and classified nature of the work being conducted there, some employees had confided to family members and friends about strange incidents that occurred during the night shifts. These included sightings of unidentified aircraft, encounters with mysterious figures in the forest, and equipment malfunctions that could not be explained by conventional technical problems. The wartime reports were particularly significant because they established that unusual activity in the TNT area had been occurring for more than 20 years before the famous 1966 Mothman encounters. This historical continuity suggested that the location itself might have some special significance or properties that attracted or generated unusual phenomena. Keel's research also revealed connections between the Mothman sightings and similar events occurring throughout the Ohio River Valley during the same time period. Other communities along the river had reported encounters with large winged creatures and associated phenomena, though these incidents had not received the same level of media attention as the Point Pleasant events. The geographical distribution of reports suggested that the Mothman phenomenon was not limited to a single location, but was part of a larger pattern of activity that extended throughout the river valley and possibly beyond. This finding supported theories that the creatures might be migratory, or that multiple individuals of the same unknown species were present in the region. As Keel's investigation progressed through the summer and fall of 1967, he began to notice that the frequency of Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant was gradually declining. The creature that had been seen regularly throughout the area for more than a year was being encountered less frequently, and when sightings did occur, they were often brief and at greater distances from witnesses. Some investigators theorized that the Mothman had become more cautious about revealing itself to human observers, perhaps as a result of the extensive publicity and investigation that its presence had generated. Others suggested that the creature had simply moved on to other territories, following migration patterns, or completing whatever mission or purpose had brought it to Point Pleasant in the first place. However, the reduction in Mothman sightings did not mean that unusual phenomena had disappeared from the Point Pleasant area. If anything, other types of strange events seemed to increase as the creature encounters declined. UFO reports became more frequent and more detailed, with witnesses describing craft that demonstrated advanced technological capabilities far beyond any known human aircraft. The electronic interference and communications problems that had plagued the area since the beginning of the Mothman activity also continued and in some cases intensified. Residents reported increasingly sophisticated intrusions into their telephone conversations, with mysterious callers who seemed to possess detailed knowledge of private activities and personal information. Most ominously, during the final months of 1967, several residents reported seeing the Mothman in the vicinity of the Silver Bridge, the suspension bridge that connected Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio, across the Ohio River. These sightings were particularly troubling to John Keel and other investigators, who had begun to suspect that the creature's presence might be connected to impending disasters or tragedies. The Silver Bridge had been built in 1928 and was a vital transportation link for the region, carrying thousands of vehicles daily between West Virginia and Ohio. The bridge was a source of civic pride for Point Pleasant and an important symbol of the community's connection to the broader economy and culture of the Ohio River Valley. However, by 1967, the bridge was showing signs of age and wear from nearly 40 years of constant use. Some engineers and transportation officials had expressed concerns about the bridge's condition and its ability to handle the increasing traffic loads of the modern era. These concerns were not widely publicized, but they had been the subject of some discussion among government officials and transportation planners. The reports of Mothman sightings near the Silver Bridge took on added significance as 1967 drew toward its close. Witnesses described seeing the creature perched on the bridge's towers and cables, as if it were conducting some form of surveillance or inspection of the structure. Others reported seeing it flying in patterns around the bridge, sometimes hovering over the roadway for several minutes before departing. These bridge-related sightings created a sense of unease among residents who used the crossing daily for work, shopping, and social activities. Some people began taking alternate routes to avoid the bridge, though these detours added considerable time and distance to their travels. Others continued to use the bridge but felt anxious and uncomfortable during their crossings, watching the sky for any sign of glowing red eyes or massive wings. The culmination of the Mothman phenomenon in Point Pleasant came on December 15, 1967, exactly 13 months after the first reported sighting by Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette in the TNT area. On that cold Friday afternoon, as workers throughout the region were beginning their evening commute home for the weekend, tragedy struck the Point Pleasant community in a way that no one had anticipated or prepared for. At approximately 5 o'clock in the afternoon, during the height of rush hour traffic, the Silver Bridge suddenly collapsed without warning, sending dozens of vehicles and their occupants plunging into the icy waters of the Ohio River. The collapse occurred so quickly that most drivers had no time to react or escape, and the frigid December water made survival extremely difficult for those who did manage to escape from their vehicles. The bridge collapse was a catastrophe that shocked not only Point Pleasant, but the entire nation. 46 people lost their lives in the disaster, making it one of the deadliest bridge failures in United States history. The victims included men, women and children from throughout the Ohio River Valley, workers returning home from their jobs, shoppers who had crossed into Ohio for Christmas purchases, and families who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time when the structure failed. The investigation that followed the Silver Bridge collapse revealed that the disaster had been caused by the failure of a single component in the bridge's suspension system, an eye-bar that had developed a small crack over time and had finally succumbed to the stresses of decades of use in winter weather conditions. The failure of this one small piece of metal had triggered a chain reaction that brought down the entire span in a matter of seconds. The engineering analysis of the collapse found no evidence of sabotage, deliberate damage, or any external force that might have contributed to the structural failure. The bridge had simply reached the end of its useful life and had failed due to the accumulated effects of age, weather, and constant use. The tragedy was a sobering reminder of the importance of infrastructure maintenance and the consequences of allowing vital transportation links to deteriorate beyond safe operating conditions. In the immediate aftermath of the Silver Bridge collapse, Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant virtually ceased. The creature that had been a regular presence in the area for more than a year simply disappeared, as if its purpose in the community had been fulfilled or its mission completed. This timing led to considerable speculation about the possible connection between the Mothman's presence and the bridge disaster. Some residents and investigators interpreted the timing as evidence that the Mothman had been trying to warn the community about the impending disaster. They pointed to the creature's apparent interest in the bridge during its final weeks of appearances and suggested that its mysterious behavior had been an attempt to draw attention to the structure's deteriorating condition. Others took a darker view, suggesting that the Mothman had somehow caused or contributed to the bridge collapse, either through unknown supernatural powers or as part of a larger pattern of malevolent activity. These theories were supported by the creature's association with other forms of unusual and disturbing phenomena throughout its 13-month presence in the area. However, the majority of investigators, including John Keel, concluded that the timing was probably coincidental. There was no physical evidence linking the Mothman to the structural failure of the bridge, and the engineering analysis clearly showed that the collapse had resulted from natural causes rather than external interference. The creature's disappearance after the disaster might simply have indicated that whatever had brought it to Point Pleasant had run its course. The Silver Bridge disaster marked the end of the classic Mothman period in Point Pleasant, though the creature's impact on the community would continue for decades to come. Mary Heyer continued to document unusual events in the area for several years after the bridge collapse, but the frequency and intensity of paranormal activity declined dramatically after December of 1967. John Keel completed his investigation of the Point Pleasant events and published his findings in his book, The Mothman Prophecies, in 1975. The book became a classic in the field of unexplained phenomena and introduced the Mothman story to a global audience. Keel's work established Point Pleasant as one of the most significant locations in the study of paranormal activity and unknown creatures. The four original witnesses, Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Mallett, largely withdrew from public discussion of their experience after the initial wave of publicity surrounding their encounter. They continued to live in the Point Pleasant area and maintained throughout their lives that their account of the November 15th, 1966 encounter was accurate and truthful. Roger Scarberry continued working in construction and eventually started his own small contracting business. He married Linda, and they raised a family together, though they rarely spoke publicly about their role in the Mothman story. When approached by researchers or journalists, Roger would confirm the basic facts of their encounter, but declined to speculate about the nature or origins of the creature they had seen. Linda Scarberry also maintained her silence about the Mothman encounter for most of her life, focusing on raising her children and supporting her husband's business. She occasionally spoke with close friends about the lasting impact that the experience had on her life, describing nightmares and anxiety that persisted for years after the incident. Steve and Mary Mallette followed similar paths, building quiet lives in Point Pleasant, while avoiding the publicity and speculation that continued to surround their story. Steve worked at the chemical plant for more than 30 years before retiring, while Mary raised their children and later worked part-time in local businesses. They remained close friends with the Scarberrys throughout their lives, bound together by their shared experience of the impossible. In the decades that followed the original Mothman encounters, Point Pleasant gradually embraced its connection to the mysterious creature and the events of 1966 and 1967. The town erected a statue of the Mothman in the centre of its business district and established an annual Mothman festival that attracts thousands of visitors from around the world. The festival celebrates not only the mystery itself, but also the community's role in one of America's most enduring paranormal legends. Visitors come to Point Pleasant to see the locations where the encounters occurred, to meet with researchers and investigators, and to experience for themselves the atmosphere of a place where the impossible briefly became reality. Scientific explanations for the Mothman sightings continue to be proposed by researchers and skeptics, who attempt to find conventional explanations for the extraordinary claims of the witnesses. The most common theories suggest that the encounters involved large birds, possibly sandhill cranes or great blue herons, observed under conditions that made accurate identification difficult. Other explanations have included mass hysteria, where initial reports influenced subsequent witnesses to interpret ordinary phenomena as supernatural encounters. Some researchers have suggested that the witnesses might have encountered experimental aircraft or other classified military technology that was being tested in the area during the height of the Cold War. However, these conventional explanations have not satisfied many of the original witnesses or the investigators who studied the events firsthand. The consistency of the descriptions, the credibility of the witnesses, and the associated phenomena such as electromagnetic interference and animal behavior continue to suggest that something genuinely unusual occurred in Point Pleasant during those 13 months of mystery. The Mothman phenomenon has inspired numerous books, documentaries, television programs, and fictional works, including a major motion picture released in 2002. These cultural representations have ensured that the story of Point Pleasant's encounter with the unknown remains part of American folklore and continues to intrigue new generations of readers, viewers, and investigators. Modern paranormal researchers continue to study the Mothman case as one of the most well-documented examples of an unknown creature encounter in the United States. The wealth of witness testimony, contemporary newspaper coverage, and investigative documentation makes Point Pleasant a valuable case study for understanding how communities respond to encounters with the unexplained, and how such events become integrated into local culture and identity. The case has also become important in the study of what researchers call window areas, geographical locations that seem to experience recurring episodes of unusual phenomena over extended periods of time. Point Pleasant's history of strange encounters, from Native American reports through the modern Mothman era, suggests that certain locations may have properties or characteristics that make them more likely to experience paranormal activity. Today, visitors to Point Pleasant can explore many of the locations associated with the original Mothman sightings. The TNT area, now officially designated as the McClintic Wildlife Management Area, remains largely as it was in 1966, with many of the original concrete bunkers still standing among the trees. The area is popular with hikers, bird watchers, and those hoping to catch a glimpse of the legendary creature or experience some of the mystery that made Point Pleasant famous. The roads through the wildlife management area follow the same routes that Roger Scarborough drove on that fateful November evening in 1966. Visitors can park near the bunker where the Mothman was first sighted and walk the same paths where the four young people encountered the impossible. The concrete igloos remain as silent witnesses to events that transformed a quiet military facility into one of America's most famous paranormal locations. Point Pleasant's Mothman Museum houses an extensive collection of artifacts, photographs, documents, and memorabilia related to the sightings and their aftermath. The museum's exhibits provide visitors with a comprehensive overview of the events that transformed the small West Virginia town into a destination for those interested in the paranormal and unexplained. The museum's collection includes original newspaper clippings from Mary Hyer's coverage of the events, copies of the official police reports filed by Deputy Halstead, photographs of witnesses and locations, and items from John Keel's investigation. Visitors can also view maps showing the locations of various sightings, timelines of the creature's appearances, and displays explaining the different theories that have been proposed to explain the phenomenon. Perhaps most importantly, the museum serves as a repository for the ongoing collection of witness accounts and related materials. New reports of unusual phenomena in the Point Pleasant area continue to be documented, and researchers use the museum's resources to study patterns and connections that might shed light on the nature of the original Mothman encounters. The Silver Bridge disaster is also commemorated in Point Pleasant, though the focus is appropriately on honouring the memory of those who lost their lives rather than on any supposed connection to the Mothman phenomenon. A memorial park near the site of the original bridge includes a monument listing the names of the 46 victims and providing information about the engineering failure that caused the collapse. A new bridge was constructed to replace the Silver Bridge, incorporating modern safety features and engineering standards that ensure such a catastrophic failure cannot recur. The new span serves as both a vital transportation link and a symbol of the community's resilience in the face of tragedy and loss. The annual Mothman Festival has become one of West Virginia's most popular tourist events, drawing visitors from throughout the United States and around the world. The festival features guest speakers including researchers, investigators, and witnesses who share their experiences and theories about the Mothman and related phenomena. Festival activities include guided tours of the TNT area and other significant locations, presentations by experts in various fields related to unexplained phenomena, vendor booths selling books and merchandise, and entertainment that celebrates both the mystery and the community that has become its guardian. The event has grown from a small local celebration to a major regional attraction that brings significant economic benefits to Point Pleasant and the surrounding area. The festival also serves as an important gathering place for people who have had their own encounters with unusual phenomena, providing them with a supportive community where their experiences are taken seriously rather than dismissed or ridiculed. Many attendees report that the festival atmosphere helps them process and understand their own mysterious encounters. Research into the Mothman phenomenon continues through various organizations and individual investigators who study unexplained creatures and paranormal activity. Modern technology has provided new tools for documenting and analyzing unusual encounters, including digital cameras, video recording equipment, electromagnetic field detectors, and other scientific instruments that were not available to the original investigators in the 1960s. However, despite these technological advances, the fundamental mystery of the Mothman remains unsolved. No definitive physical evidence has been recovered, no specimens have been captured or examined, and no conventional explanation has adequately addressed all aspects of the reported encounters. The creature continues to represent one of the most compelling unsolved mysteries in the field of cryptozoology and paranormal research. Some modern researchers have expanded their investigations beyond Point Pleasant to study reports of similar creatures in other locations around the world. Large, winged humanoid beings have been reported in various countries and cultures, often in association with disasters, social upheaval, or other significant events. These global reports suggest that the Mothman phenomenon might be part of a larger pattern of encounters with unknown entities. The psychological and sociological aspects of the Mothman case have also attracted attention from researchers interested in how communities respond to encounters with the unknown. Point Pleasant's experience provides valuable insights into the ways that extraordinary events can transform local culture, create new forms of identity and meaning, and influence economic and social development. The case has also been important in the development of modern approaches to investigating unexplained phenomena. John Keel's systematic methodology and comprehensive documentation established standards for paranormal research that continue to influence investigators today. His emphasis on gathering multiple witness accounts, examining associated phenomena, and placing events in historical context has become the foundation for serious study of unusual encounters. Educational institutions have also found value in the Mothman case as a subject for studying folklore, urban legends, and the transmission of cultural narratives. The story demonstrates how modern myths and legends develop and spread, how media coverage influences public perception of unusual events, and how communities adapt to and integrate extraordinary experiences into their ongoing cultural life. Whether the Mothman was a previously unknown species of creature, a visitor from another dimension, an angel or demon from religious tradition, or simply a case of mistaken identity may never be definitively determined. The evidence remains incomplete, the witnesses have largely passed away, and the creature itself has not returned to provide additional opportunities for study and documentation. What remains undeniable is the profound impact that 13 months of unusual encounters had on Point Pleasant, and the lasting place that the community has earned in the annals of American mystery and folklore. The town's experience demonstrates both the human capacity for wonder and the enduring appeal of mysteries that resist simple explanation or conventional understanding. The people of Point Pleasant continue to live with the legacy of their encounter with the unknown, embracing their role as guardians of one of America's most enduring paranormal mysteries. Visitors continue to arrive seeking evidence of the Mothman, answers to unsolved questions, or simply the experience of standing in a place where the impossible briefly became reality. As the Ohio River continues to flow past Point Pleasant, carrying with it the stories and memories of countless generations, the town maintains its connection to the mysterious events of 1966 and 1967. The Mothman may no longer soar through the skies above the TNT area, but its presence continues to be felt in the imagination and culture of a community that was forever changed by its encounter with the unexplained. The ancient hills of West Virginia have witnessed many mysteries throughout their long history, from the sacred visions of Native American tribes to the industrial transformations of the modern era. The Mothman represents just one chapter in this ongoing story of human encounters with the unknown, but it remains one of the most compelling and well-documented examples of such events in American history. In the quiet moments of a West Virginia evening when the last light fades from the Ohio River and the familiar sounds of small-town life give way to the deep silence of the countryside, some residents of Point Pleasant still find themselves glancing toward the sky. They watch for any sign of glowing red eyes or massive wings that might signal the return of their mysterious visitor. The Mothman's legacy lives on not only in the stories and memories of those who witnessed its presence, but also in the questions and possibilities that its appearance raised about the nature of reality and the limits of human understanding. In a world increasingly dominated by technology and scientific explanation, the creature's brief residence in Point Pleasant serves as a reminder that mysteries still exist and that wonder still has a place in human experience. The story of the Mothman of Point Pleasant stands as a testament to the enduring human fascination with the unexplained and the possibility that our world still harbours secrets that science has yet to unveil. In a small town where the ordinary and extraordinary briefly intersected, a legend was born that continues to inspire curiosity, investigation, and the eternal human quest to understand the mysteries that surround us. As visitors leave Point Pleasant and return to their own communities, they carry with them not only the story of the Mothman, but also a renewed sense of wonder about the possibilities that exist beyond the boundaries of conventional knowledge. They have stood in a place where reality seemed to expand beyond its normal limits, where witnesses encountered something that challenged every assumption about what was possible in the world. The Mothman may have disappeared from the skies above Point Pleasant, but its influence continues to ripple outward through the countless people who have heard its story and found in it a reminder that the universe still holds surprises for those who are willing to look beyond the familiar and the explained. In the end, perhaps that is the creature's most important legacy. Not the fear it once inspired, but the sense of wonder it continues to nurture in all who encounter its remarkable tale.